Jesus was always concerned that whatever represented the inner life would be reflected on the outside. A little bit later in the scripture that John read for us this morning, Jesus says to the scribes and Pharisees, "You all are like tombs full of dead, rotting bodies, but on the outside, all whitewashed and pretty." Jesus wants us to recognize that there is this conflict sometimes between what's going on the inside and what is being projected on the outside. A phylactery in ancient time was a headband that went around the Pharisee's head. It was intended to be worn by anyone, but it had on this little headband these strings with little slips of paper, sometimes actually a little tiny box with a scroll of paper rolled up inside of it, which had the words, "The Lord our God is one," which was referred to as the Shema. It was the belief that that was the principal statement of all who were followers of Yahweh. But what happened with the Pharisees is rather than letting that be a constant reminder in front of their eyes every day, dangling, it began to be something they dressed up for show, and it lost its purpose. I want you to know, my friends, in the life of the church, in the life of our spiritual journey, just about anything can start out to be good and be corrupted along the way. I want to tell you just quickly that in ancient times there were 7 kinds of Pharisees, according to the research offered by William Barclay, the English scholar, and I just want to go over them quickly with you. The first was called a shoulder Pharisee. A shoulder Pharisee was a Pharisee who wore their good deeds on their shoulder so everybody could see. They were more concerned that you could know what they were doing rather than the actual benefit of the good deed to the person in need. The second kind of Pharisee was a Pharisee called wait and see. This Pharisee was always good at procrastinating, doing the right thing or doing a good deed. The third type of Pharisee was a Pharisee called the blind, or sometimes referred to as the bruised or bleeding Pharisee. This was a person who was, we would probably say, the weak person internally. They would literally walk around with their eyes closed. And you say, well, why would anybody do that? They were afraid that they would see a beautiful woman and that they would have thoughts that they shouldn't have. And so they would walk around with their eyes closed. And they would run into things. They would fall. And so they would get bruised and they would start to bleed, and that's what they were called. The fourth type of Pharisee was the pestle or the humpback Pharisee. And that's the Pharisee that was always walking bent over with false humility. The fifth type of Pharisee was called the ever-reckoning Pharisee, always counting up their good deeds. You see, they wanted to be feeling in their heart that they were in good standing with God. They wanted to know that their good deeds were of a sufficient amount that they would get into heaven. The sixth Pharisee was the God-fearing or the timid Pharisee. The God-fearing Pharisee was the Pharisee who was totally motivated by doing the right thing because he was afraid that God was going to get him or punish him if he didn't. The last of the group of Pharisees, the seventh group, is the God-loving Pharisee. That's the one who believes that God is love and that God calls us to love one another and care for one another. My friends, we need to learn how to live our life motivated by the right thing and doing it for the right reason. You know, Jesus concludes this passage of Scripture today by saying to the scribes and Pharisees that if you really want to be a person who is following God for the right reason, go out in the world and live your life as a servant to others. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very much and 1 being very little, how would you rate your life today in terms of being a servant? Would you consider that you're about a 5 or maybe a 3? If someone is in need and you see them and you could do something to make a difference, would you do it? I want to close this morning by telling you that I am most grateful for the people who in my lifetime have shown me what it means to be a servant. They did it by example. How about you? Right now, whether that person's looking down from a heavenly balcony, whether that person is sitting beside you, or whether that person lives halfway across the country, think of that person who stands out to you as a model servant of Jesus Christ, a person that you hope you have borne your life after as an example. Think about that person and say a prayer of thanksgiving and ask God to help you to be that kind of person in the world, a faithful servant to people wherever you meet them.